limitless power over them. Today was going to be one of those days. The scholars had been silently absorbed in their work for many hours when the library doors swung unexpectedly open and a unit of Imperial Guards entered. Yen Wan-sun and the young novice exchanged anxious looks, knowing this couldn't be good news. It wasn't. The guards came marching through the library and picked out a dozen of the scholars at random. They were told to stop what they were doing and made to file out into the high, broad stone passage beyond the doors, where more armed guards were gathered with horses and a wagon with iron bars like a cage. Yen Wan-sun and Lu Xuan, among the chosen, found themselves being herded like cattle into the rolling cage. "Where are we being taken?" Yen Wan-sun dared to ask one of the guards. Because he was so old and frail-looking, his questioning was tolerated without the usual severe reprimand. "Before His Divine Majesty the Emperor," the guard replied. As the military convoy set off on its long journey, the library workers were all convinced they were being taken away to their deaths. It had happened before, when the Emperor became frustrated by previous teams of scholars' lack of progress in finding the secret. It was said that the last contingent who had failed to satisfy his demands had been thrown into a pit and buried under tons of hot coals. For the rest of that day and into the next, the convoy made its way through the lantern-lit tunnels, just part of the vast subterranean network that the Emperor had constructed to connect all 200 of his palaces. His Divine Excellency never travelled above ground, as this made him vulnerable to evil spirits that might prey on him for his greatness. Then, at last, the convoy reached the great palace where the terrified scholars were to learn their fate. They were used to the splendour of the library, but the even greater opulence of their unfamiliar new surroundings made them gape as they were released from the cage and marched through corridor after corridor, each more wondrous than the last, until they arrived at the throne room that was the most breathtaking of all. And there he sat, surrounded by his courtiers, high on his golden perch, clad in all the magnificence to be expected of the greatest ruler in the universe. Yen Wan-sun had expected him to be taller and more impressive somehow. The scholars were made to grovel before him. After a long silence, the Emperor addressed them in a voice that was high and reedy and quivering with rage. "Where is the knowledge with whose discovery you were tasked? Why has it not yet been brought to me? You there, stand up and reply to your Emperor." It was old Yen Wan-sun who had been chosen to speak on the scholars' behalf. Bowing his head in humble deference, he said, "Your Divine Excellency, we are still searching for it. The undertaking is so great, our numbers so few." "Silence!" barked the Emperor. "You are lazy and worthless, and such failure will be met with the appropriate chastisement." The hearts of the scholars went cold, and they trembled with fear at his words, but nobody dared to make a sound. Nothing could change their fate now. Next the guards seized them and marched them to the windowless stone tower where the sentence was to be carried out. Once they had been stripped naked of their robes and bound up in chains, the Emperor appeared again, come to enjoy the spectacle. "Let the punishments begin," he announced with a smile. Then, one by one, to the thundering beat of drums that only partly drowned out their screams, the scholars met their grisly end. Some were blinded with hot irons before being disemboweled. Others were flayed alive and their raw flesh doused with salt until those who hadn't died of shock and agony were beheaded. Some, including the poor young man, Lu Xuan, suffered the slow and deliberate amputation of all 4 limbs, along with ears and noses sliced off, tongues removed, eyes put out. Yen Wan-sun was the last in the line. He was on his knees, broken and weeping at the terrible scene he'd been made to witness, and now, knowing he couldn't live with the memory of such inhuman suffering, he closed his eyes and prayed for death. The image of his young friend, Lu Xuan, being dragged away screaming in terror by the ankles, soon to join the heap of mutilated bodies whose combined blood pooled an inch deep on the floor.